It is the Final Word Cricket Podcast, Season 16, Episode 23. We're recording on the 15th of July, Monday afternoon after a massive weekend, both in London and around the world, and in the cricketing world as well. I'm Adam Collins, and down the screen from me in Portugal is what looks to be Jeff Lemon in something of a gold chain or something like that. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, it's not a gold chain; it's a silver chain. But
Silver chain. Okay.
I'm just going with I'm entering my late stage Christianity period. No, not quite. It's an abstract piece that people seem to think is a crucifix, but it is not, in fact. Although, if you want to wear one, that is up to you. We are all encompassing and all welcoming here on The Final Word.
We are. I mentioned it's been a big weekend. We might come to that in a sec, but yes, in terms of what we'll talk about today, Australia's men are touring England and Scotland in September. I didn't anticipate talking about this today, but we'll lead with that because squad news is kind of wider in its context than ordinarily would be the case. There is quite a lot of stuff going on in franchise land, be it players not being allowed to go to tournaments. This is the case in Pakistan. We've got some changes in the Indian setup. We've got the England women who continue to smash New Zealand as they have across the last couple of weeks in domestic cricket. In England, we'll come to at the end a few other bits and pieces along the way. We're here for Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City, more extra, less ordinary. And Jeff, my voice is somewhat husky because, yes, last night was the final of the Euros, and well, it was all shaping up to one of the great nights out, really. Had England just held on and got to a penalty shootout, maybe it would have been, but they go down 2-1. And I found the whole experience quite an interesting one in that there's been so much sort of animosity towards the way this England team have chosen to play under Gareth Southgate and the way he's moved the puzzle pieces or chess pieces across the last month or so. But that all kind of went out the window when they made the final and had the chance to do something that would have been, I guess it would have been seen as the biggest sporting achievement in England since 1966, whether that's fair or otherwise, but it would have been interpreted that way. There would have been bank holiday, probably announced by the government. That was hinted during the week after they won their semi-final. It was massive. It was like everyone's grand final day, Jeff, but everyone having it at the same time.
It was, but particularly because there's a decent chunk of the Final Word audience who are from England, so a lot of the online presence, a lot of the chat was about that game, even though we're here to talk about cricket. There's that overlap, particularly with major tournaments. If you want to be part of that, you can jump on the Patreon. You can access the ad-free feed as well.
Yes.
If you don't want ad breaks in your show, go to patreon.com/thefinalword and join up, and then you don't have to have them anymore. But you won't be able to avoid occasionally us meandering into other sports when it seems like it's relevant. It was interesting. Yeah. It was interesting watching a sport as someone who doesn't really know anything about it. Honestly, obviously I know how it works, but I don't have any expertise compared to what we're doing for work when we're watching a sport we do know a lot about. It was curious being with English supporters through most of the build-up, because most of the time in the Caribbean through the group stages, and there was so much angst and woe and, oh, God, we're awful and we're a horrible team, and somehow managed to keep winning, somehow managed to conjure a moment in every game. Getting through that penalty shootout nervelessly seemed very significant given England's penalty history, but then it was just too quality a piece of setup and finishing for that second goal, and it was like it came so late in the game that it felt like there was no coming back from that. But yeah, it was interesting just how sort of depressed and down in the mouth everybody was about a team that made it to the final and then suddenly got excited about the final when effectively it was the same team playing the same way, which was not being particularly proactive, being pretty defensive, sitting back and eventually getting nailed for it.
Yeah, all of that. I experienced it upstairs in a pub, not right near the Oval, not the pub I'm normally at, the Black Prince one across the road. And we were, as part of Pat Noon Stag, Pat, who's been a great friend of the show, just finished up at CricViz recently, but he's done a power of work over there and been a close ally, you could say, in helping us tell stories on the podcast. But we had about 30 or so people in this room, but there might have been. Look, in ordinary times, the room's capacity might have been 60, and there were comfortably 100 people crammed in there. It was that visceral experience, all bodies up against each other, and when Palmer scored, it was, as they say, limbs everywhere in there, and so on. But yeah, it could have been. Had we been watching the day 5 of Jimmy Anderson's farewell, remembering that it was meant to be the final day of his Test career, it could have been an extraordinary day from start to end, because the news everyone woke up to in the UK was that there was nearly an assassination of a former president overnight, and then it could have been from there, and that's a huge news story, right? Which we shouldn't. Which again, we're a cricket podcast, but we talk about other things occasionally. That is a very significant moment in a very, very significant election, and we could have been all going to Lords and documenting Anderson's final day, which of itself in our world is such a big thing, and then going off to the Euros at night. Didn't quite play out that way, but yeah, it was a super Sunday in many respects.
I mean, Christ, if the overnight news had been slightly different, and if that had been like, imagine that being the news story of the morning, and then wouldn't have been quite as big. The England West Indies test would have probably had to take a beat, probably had to give up the front page, had things gone a bit differently in Pennsylvania. But had you had a grandstand finish at the cricket straight into that game at the football, and I guess the quality of the last two goals as well. The Palmer goal, and then it was Cucurella, wasn't it, with that setup pass that was just. I mean, too good. I can't help having a bit of, I've got a bit of a twinge for Spain. I've spent time there. I speak the language. I've got some kind of connection with it. So, and seeing how they were able to finish that off after the women won the Women's World Cup last time around as well. That's quite a culturally exciting thing as well, of having this genuine powerhouse of football across men's and women's football at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, same with me over here, right? Like, clearly a proud Australian. Not that informs the way I interpret cricket, but the way I sort of see myself in the world is I'm an Australian who happens to live in the UK. Yeah, I've got a British passport, got a very English family background and so on, but still I'll never feel English if that distinction's possible, despite having been a long-term resident and citizen and so on. But I get totally swept up in all of this. Like, it does feel like a big thing to be part of, even if it is only every other year when they're at a major tournament or whatever it is. So, I sort of think about how cool would have it been had they won, and like my kids having been alive for England winning a thing, and all these little things that don't mean anything, but it does sort of like a lot of sporting moments. Like, how do we, if I say to you, I don't know, if I say to you a year like 89, your first instinct would be to say, oh, well, of course, that's when Australia regained the Ashes in England, right? We think in these, whether we should or not, whether it's healthy or not, we do benchmark things that happen in a given year by sporting events.
Yeah, probably if you said 89, I'd say Gary Ablett 9 goals, Norm Smith losing side. That's what's coming to me before. I'm thinking of that before I'm thinking of the Ashes.
True. I'm thinking best grand final of all time as well. But alongside,
I was watching that. I was watching that footy grand final. As a tiny child, where I probably wasn't really aware of the cricket in 89, and that was more retrospective. But I suppose 88 to the America's Cup, isn't it? So
83.
80, what's it? 83. What am I? 88. I'm thinking of the bicentenary, all the tall ships and whatnot, and everybody getting Bob Hawke giving us all a medallion at kindergarten, whatever it was. Probably still got mine in a shoebox somewhere. Probably everyone still has them in a shoebox somewhere. Yeah, the bicentenary medals. Anyway, it is nice to be able to be a bandwagoner sometimes, to just to go, you know what, I'm not actually going to, like, I didn't sit there and watch all the England games with my colleagues who were watching them through the group stage, because I was like, frankly, it's football. It takes too long. Extra time is annoying. And I don't actually have 3 hours to spend watching this game. I've got work to do. So I didn't, I just checked the results. But it's nice to be able to bandwagon in from the semi-finals or so in a World Cup or a Euros or whatever, and then pretend you've been, why does Pickford keep going long? Just to act like you know something about it.
Well, yeah, all vibes for me. I've played football for probably 20 years now, and I still haven't got a fucking clue about the technical side of it, because it's not my native, it's not my mother tongue.
Hoof it forward.
Route 1, just fucking go to long ball. That suits me. Anyway, the sport we actually do cover for a living is cricket. Just a quick wash up from the England Windies, because we didn't get a chance to talk afterwards. We did the Day 3 pod with Cam. It was a really interesting discussion on the Wisden podcast. They released that on the weekend with Phil Walker and the Azrana steering a conversation about the state of West Indies cricket. We probably missed that a little bit in our coverage last week, because there was so much narrative
I felt like
around.
We've done it. It would have been Control C, Control V. We've had that conversation. There's nothing new to say, and I think we talked about it fairly well during the West Indies trip to Australia, where there's so much negativity about West Indies getting belted in test matches, because they do get belted in test matches, but also all teams get belted in test matches. England got belted in India. The test matches tend to be won by large margins more often than not, which is why close ones are exciting, which is why Brisbane, when the West Indies won, was exciting. That's the payoff, is that most of those games aren't exciting. And so there is the over negativity about West Indies cricket when they are still a team that is able to produce some great test cricket once in a while, and most teams don't produce it more than once in a while.
True, but I think there's a slightly subtle difference to what you're saying there and the wider piece in all of this. Like, where Phil was taking it was comments from Johnny Grave that were given to Dan Gallen in the magazine a couple of months ago. I remember reading
about
that piece
the funding
at the time
side,
and thinking we should discuss it, because it was quite significant. I reckon that a CEO is almost it's unusual. It's not diplomatic. It's sort of use the press to advance a cause that normally would happen behind closed doors, but it's almost a plea of desperation, right? And it's not the first time Graves been public in his commentary around the disparity of funding, and it's the structural disadvantages that they suffer from, and it's the inability for anything to change while we have the status quo, and how it's actually going to get worse from where we are. I think that's probably the way to frame it. If whatever right now is the benchmark, the central case, right? If you assume all things will continue as they are, things never do that way. But if you're modelling it, then because of the disparity in funding getting worse, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, the Windies, the number of times the Windies will be able to pull off something special will diminish too. So that's the scary bit. If you, like we, have been talking about what Test cricket might look like in 5 or 10 years, we're obsessed with it, really. Are the Windies part of that conversation, or do we benchmark their last great day being that February afternoon at the Gabba earlier this year? I bloody hope not, but I fear that we do, because they had no chance. They had really no way to win this Test match this week. And I know that we do see big margins when
they hadn't played
teams
since.
go abroad.
We talked about the Gabba. They haven't played a Test match since.
And they played one 3-day game against a county select 11. They played a couple of games in Ireland against an Irish Wolves development team the previous month. But the actual groundwork you need to put in to be able to compete. And I'm not saying that other countries don't do fly in, fly out stuff as well. We're going to talk about this a little bit later today about something a wrinkle I saw in the schedule that came out for the Big Bash last week. But if you wish to see countries that can't compete right now compete, something's got to change. But it doesn't feel like there's any momentum for change outside of 12 hours each time the Windies get smashed, like at Adelaide 2 years ago. Remember that Test match we did in Adelaide in late 2022? And it did feel existential. Yeah, it did feel like there was no way back for them compared to where they'd been in the past. And I know that comparing the Windies to the 70s and 80s and 90s is ridiculous now because it's such a long time ago, but it's hard not to as well, knowing what their ceiling was when all things were vaguely equal compared to what their ceiling is now that they're absolutely not.
Yeah, the past eras thing, it's like getting annoyed that the current Hungarian team isn't playing like Puskás. There's a point where you got to let it go. But I think that part of what Johnny Grave said that was interesting, and it was something where I felt quite naive because I just hadn't considered this aspect of it, despite having thought so much about cricket, politics, and finances, is that you have this setup, which we know and understand, where the home team keeps the revenue from a tour and the home team pays the expenses, right? They pay for the travel and the hotels and all the rest of it. They bear the cost of having the touring team come out. And so I just hadn't sort of put together that there's still a massive cost for the touring side, because the touring side still has to pay the match fees. And the match fees are significant, and they have to pay the fees for the camps to do the warm up and the training to get ready for the trips, and they're paying some of the initial travel costs. And so, being the visiting side on a tour still ends up costing a huge amount of money. And it was a blind spot that I hadn't considered that was actually the case. I hadn't really factored that in. So if you're a board with limited resources, it's not just that you can't afford to host in the way that Ireland have had to pull out of hosting some games. There reaches a point where without enough funding, you can't afford to be the guests either. You can't afford to tour. So that's where something like what Richard Gould, the ECB boss, talked about with us in that interview we did with him last year, was that understanding that there probably needed to be a rethink of the way that the home boards keep all of the revenue from the tour. So the ECB is keeping all of the pay TV money that they're getting by having West Indies and Sri Lanka come and play Test cricket, and yeah, it's not their most high billing, high drawing summer, but they're still on a multi-year TV deal that's bringing in a chunk of money over the course of several years, so it averages out to be the same per year. So why then would it be unreasonable for the visiting sides to get a cut of that income to help pay for the cost of them touring, to provide the opportunity to earn that income in the first place?
Yeah, and it's still, in England's case, is the biggest revenue stream
draw.
the ECB get. The most
Test
amount of
cricket.
money they get is the Test cricket they sell to Sky, and I suppose to the BBC as well in
and
the
the
highlights
crowds.
arrangement. But
they make a lot of money off tickets.
Absolutely, and they would have had to have refunded a lot of that money on days 3 and 4, because day 3 ended, I think, Jeff, inside the first hour, which constitutes a 100% refund. I think I got that right. So they got to see Jimmy's farewell and also get their money back for it, even though they got to see a fairly significant moment in the history of the game. To finish off on the Windies, I read Brathwaite's comments, the captain. It does sort of, it's hard to read. It's hard to watch because you can see how determined he is to try and do something. When he spoke at the toss the other day, he was encouraging, urging them to dream big. Dream big here, boys. We can do something special at Lords. And of course, that doesn't happen at all. But the quote they pulled out on Cricinfo was, dig deep, don't give up. Test cricket is tough. And he's right. It is. We all know why. It's tough. It's an extraordinarily difficult form of the game to be successful in. But you can only dig deep to the extent to which you've got something to dig towards, right? Yeah. I don't know what they can do.
You've got the ability, you've got the training, you've got something to fall back on from having prepared well enough. You can't just want it. You can't just want to middle a cover drive. That doesn't enable you to middle a cover drive.
Yeah, you can't manifest it. Like if I say, I really want to dig deep, I really want to do it, doesn't mean I can play Test cricket. And so it is for a lot of those young guys who, they may have interesting Test careers. I hope that Hodge, Athanase, and Lewis, who have been relatively new to the side, not just those three, they've got a couple of other players coming through as well who have shown a little bit. Wouldn't it be great if 2 of them kicked on and had 100 Test careers? The probability of them having 100 Test careers is fuck all. It might be like,
they'll never get to play that many. They might, even if they played every Test, they might play 6 a year.
There's that too. Let even say 50 Test matches, right? It might be, it doesn't feel like the structure is in place to support them doing it and prioritising this form of the game as well. The one thing that has finally kind of stopped now is Anderson discourse, which is good. I think that every possible angle and way to interpret the retirement of James Anderson has been done by now. The only thing that I picked up at the end of all of this was I think it got forgotten that Anderson picked his jump-off date. I think there might have been somewhere along the lines it got blurred.
But after
I think it did get blurred
that he was getting pushed.
But I think it got blurred a little bit here because the original reporting from Ali Martin, and look, that was an incredibly well-sourced piece clearly because every single detail in it was correct, was that Anderson would play this summer and would finish up at Old Trafford, right? And Anderson, subsequent to that, the next day, issued a statement saying, I'd like to finish where I started. So, this summer was the tap on the shoulder, what he said to Jonathan Agnew before the Test match in his BBC interview, where he's like, you're absolutely right. I would have always needed a push. I was never going to retire on my own terms. That's not the sort of person I am. And I think I said to you at the time, Jeff, I admire cricketers who see the world that way because it shows they want to get every last drop out of themselves. So let's put to one side that he deserved to call time when he wanted to. He's acknowledged he never would have. It was this summer, and then he picked his jump-off moment. So he would have known in doing so that, if you want to use the Shane Warne thing, he would have known taking 9 wickets in a Test match is a very unusual thing to happen, the probability of him doing that. So that wasn't his frame of reference. So given it wasn't front and center for him, I think there's a bit of projection going on here from people who are feeling like, I saw some commentary on social media about how pissed off he looked all week. I'm like, really? Like, I watched all of that Test match and he looks well chuffed. He looks like a really content, happy guy. All the interviews he did after, all the social media pictures after, he looks top of the world. And fair enough too. He had a good Test match. He bowled well, especially in the second innings. Bowled really well in the second innings, not as well in the first. Great. He was still playing a Test match. He was still meant to bowl well. Just because he was retiring didn't mean he had to bowl shit. I think that doesn't correlate either. So I just kind of think like I'm glad we've got to the point now where we can go, yep, that was a lovely thing that happened last week. It was a nice, wholesome thing that not many cricketers get the chance to do in the way that he did it. I mean, that those scenes receiving the life membership of the MCC with Mark Nicholas and hanging up the boots, Jeff. I don't know if you saw the pictures that he put up, like actually literally hanging up his boots on the peg, being there with his mates, indeed people we've had on the show, like Greg James and Felix White, people who are really close to him. That looks like an amazing afternoon.
There was a notable bit when Nasser Hussain went into the dressing room afterwards and interviewed him, where that was basically canvassed, and Anderson said essentially, well, I didn't want to finish, but I've had to come to terms with finishing. So I think there's that side of it as well. I didn't think he was pissed off. I didn't think he was stomping around sulking. He was trying to make the most of his moment and bowled really well in that second innings, and would have felt good about that. So, but there was still a sense of frustration, I guess, at how well he bowled and how the ground that I've gone over, where it's not logically consistent that they're now picking up how great it is that Chris Woakes is now the attack leader, when exactly the same things apply to Woakes as apply to Anderson in terms of future planning. Oops.
Yeah, I think the fact that Woakes is, I think I made this point the other week, procedural fairness, right? He deserves his shirt to have his name on the back of it. Having did what he did against Australia last year when he was by degrees of magnitude more effective than Anderson was, 5 at 85.
Well, and neither of them would have played 6 tests when you've got 3 back to back. I don't think, I think if Anderson had played the summer, he wouldn't have been able to play 3 tests with 3-day turnarounds and then do it again against Sri Lanka. So maybe he could have played 4.
He did last year.
Something like
Anderson,
that.
He did last year. Anderson played 4 of the 5 last year when they were quick turnaround. So I don't think his fitness was ever really a consideration. But look, Woakes plays his 50th this week, when we got the motorway to Nottingham. We'll have daily shows every day from that. Daniel Norcross will be helming those from the ground. Exciting. Daniel on the dailies. But Chris Woakes, I think there was an interview that went out yesterday, which he finally gets choice of ends, which is kind of a nice thing, having played for all these years. Age 35, he becomes the official attack leader. Although Mark Wood has been brought into the squad to replace Anderson. I don't think Wood will play, but they've got him there if they want to have that option. The probability of Pennington and or Potts playing is very high. Amazing strike rate that Key and McCullum have got when popping in guys on debut that they perform at the first time of asking, and 2 more last week with Jamie Smith and Gus Atkinson finishing that match with 12 wickets. And he just looks, I mean, I've been watching Gus bowl for 2.5 seasons now. I mean, he does smash that hard length. He does bowl in a way that is perfectly translatable to bowling well in Australia. He isn't the kind of guy who floats in and puts it there and waits for the edge. He comes in and bends the back with a beautiful metronomic almost action. He doesn't really leave the turf, does he? It's a gorgeous approach to the crease, Archer-esque really. So, and the fact that he hits the speed radar as quickly as he does. So that's what they want. They want someone like that who they can develop for Australia for all the obvious reasons. Pennington, we don't know. But we do know that he's bowling beautifully, and all the data points towards that. But that'll be his chance, or Potts, who played a handful of Test matches in 2022. And on the other side of the ledger, Jeff, that Jamie Smith looking as good as he did straight away. He's such a gorgeous player to watch, so technically correct, it looks like he kind of always been there. I know that the degree of difficulty wasn't high, walking out at 5 for lots, well ahead in the game, but you're still going to make the runs.
Yeah, I just, like I spoke about on the daily with Cam, I liked that he did it in classic wicket-keeping sort of mode. It was okay, I've got to take a little bit of time, figure out how to get things settled, and then press home the advantage while I'm batting with more accomplished players, and then I'll have to do more of the work as I go down through the tail. And he wasn't shy about turning down singles and making sure he kept the strike and that kind of thing. There was no sheepishness about, I'm a junior player because I'm on debut. He was controlling those partnerships and controlling that innings up until that final mistake where he got himself out instead of letting Anderson have a hit.
Jeff, should we take our first break? I know we haven't gotten through as much of the agenda as I would have anticipated before break one, but maybe if we do that, we can draw a line under the test series that's taking place at the moment and return to talk about some Australia stuff. How's that sound to you?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Before going to the break, though, I am going to briefly tell you about Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City. I'm just going to note that the the daily shows have all of the bits with what's going on at Westfield at the moment. So you can refer back to that for those, and we'll have more of those coming this week. And we're still going to have some version of the competition through the test summer. We haven't quite nailed that as yet. I can tell you that she and Arnott, who is part of the Westfield team, who writes all the copy, spent some time with Daniel Norcross at the Euros last night, and Daniel was very keen to lavish him with praise, saying he's never seen anyone write copy quite like him. So that was quite a nice moment. After Sheehan captained our game yesterday perfectly, we were playing a game. It was a timed declaration match that could go about as late as probably 6:20, 6:30, and we managed to stitch it up and have the game won by 4:30. So we were well and truly in the pub where we needed to be before the football started. But yes, Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City, they are providing enormous support to what we're doing on The Final Word all the way through the summer. Download the app, back them in, and we'll tell you more about them when we come to our daily shows in a couple of days from now.
I can tell you, Adam, that they're having a lingerie pop-up in Westfield, London, between the 26th and the 28th of July. So if you wish to get your lingerie correctly fitted, as they point out, most people wear underwear every day, and that makes it an important thing. It's important for it to fit correctly. So if you want to go and get some tips on where it should be snug and where it should be airy, 26th to the 28th at Westfield, London.
We learned a bit about this, Jeff, when we interviewed Deidre McGee on The Final Word a couple of times about the bra fitting and how important that is for women athletes. Rach did it with Deidre and Alex and a few of the others when we were at Fairbreak last year, and they were like astonished at how. I don't know how to talk about this with any real authority, but the difference between what the convention is and when it's done in a more methodical way, shall we say?
Sure.
So, on the back of that, do what you say, Jeff, and get to the lingerie fitting. Didn't expect
bra sizing, as per my understanding, is an absolute nonsense anyway. It's totally arbitrary across different brands. There are so many different ways you can interpret a cup size. There is no standardized sort of system of measurement for it. So you can be told all kinds of different things. You can get all kinds of wrong recommendations, and it is a jungle out there. So maybe this is the way for you to figure out what the cup size that is going to work for you, because there is no one series of cup sizes.
The end of an unusual first segment. Thanks to Westfield. Back in a sec.